Welcome into another episode of the Odds and Audibles podcast. It's the summer. It's the time to bring on some recruiting guests. Myself, Eric Scopel, and Jared Mack of DuckTerritory.com are welcoming in Cooper Petagna of 247 Sports. Coop, you came on last July. It was a hit from a podcast perspective. We're bringing you on now. How are you doing? You ready to talk some Ducks?
Yeah, man, I'm excited. It's funny, always coming off a rankings release. It's just, I think it's entertaining. I think you start to get a pretty good feel for it after a couple years, but nobody's happy. I always talk to Andrew Ivins about it. Obviously our director of scouting, he's got to hear the brunt of it, but it's part of it, man. We look forward to it. So it's been good. I think we're glad that we have this one behind us. And the next time that we'll do this, we'll have 4 to 6 games of the high school season. So kind of looking forward to the next couple of weeks. It'd be nice.
Yeah, no, and we will touch on some of the movement with Oregon guys. I know there were some fans that were curious on some of the kind of ups and downs here, but let's start with just kind of a broad question here. Oregon's classing up to 4th nationally with the commitment of Alai Kalani-Navalu and potentially rising. There's some 5-stars still on the board. Kind of just broadly, Coop, what stands out about this class? What are some things that maybe have kind of caught your eye this year?
Yeah, well, I would start with the fact that I think they got 16 commitments. I think that's um, let me look at it. That's considerable amount less. Georgia sitting at number 3 with 19. Alabama's got 20 at number 2. Ohio State at number 1, they got 23. So stands out to me is that there's a lot of top tier talent left on the board, especially in that top 32 conversation. It seems like Georgia, it seems like Oregon is in it with a handful of these guys, right? With Jonah Williams, with DJ Pickett, the job that they have done from top to bottom, um, I think just goes to show, they're sitting there at number 4 right now, but like, to me, this is not a one-off. It was only a couple months ago where I had people hitting me up like, "Hey, what's going on with Oregon?" I think Oregon's one of those programs very similar to Georgia and Kirby Smart, where you can just trust it every year because you kind of understand the identity and the DNA of a Dan Lanning. The biggest thing that kind of stands out to me, I would say, what they've done from a top tier talent standpoint. I talked about those 16 commitments. 13 of those guys are in the top 247, right? So 13 of their 16 are in the top 250 ranked nationally. So if you're talking to Oregon fans of what they've done, it's been pretty incredible. Just not only the quantity but the quality, and they have a very aggressive approach to the recruiting trail, but it's also very calculated. It's not irresponsible, and what I mean by that is, they're not out there trying to win the perception battle every year. They're very calculated about where they're recruiting, who they're going head to head with. Those are things we can get into, but you look at a program like USC, who I wouldn't say is struggling, but has the potential to recruit the way Oregon is right now, and they haven't been able to do that. Oregon's not going down to Georgia trying to get Justice Terry, trying to get Isaiah Gibson, trying to beat Kirby Smart at his own game in the state of Georgia. That's just very difficult to do. So I think Dan Lanning, Marshall Malkow, the rest of his staff have been extremely smart about picking their spots, owning the West Coast, and then understanding who are some guys that they can be opportunistic on around the rest of the country. So from a top shelf standpoint, they're doing a remarkable job.
From a top shelf standpoint, Dakorien Moore, their number 1 overall recruit, I just kind of want to know what you think about him. So if you wanted to just go and talk about the type of player that he is and what you've seen on tape, like, be our guest. Like, that's exactly what we kind of want to hear.
I think the best way to try to figure out where to put Dakorien Moore, like, all right, how's he stack up against a year like last year where I believe we had 7 receivers in the top 32. Is just an absolutely loaded year between Jeremiah Smith and Cam Coleman. Any other year, Cam Coleman would have been the number 1 receiver in the country. You had Ryan Williams, TJ Moore, guys like Ryan Wingo, Gatlin Bear. I'm missing 1 or 2. But that being said, that was a loaded year of receiver last year in 2024. That is not the case here in 2025. I think Dakorien Moore still would have been a top 32 guy, probably would have been a guy that would have been in the top 16, top 20. So that's really what we think of him in terms of the player. hovering around 5'11". He's 185 pounds. Like he's ready to go. He's playing the highest level of competition in the state of Texas at Duncanville. And the good thing about him is like, all right, he's not undersized, but if you're going to be under the prototypical 6 feet, then you have to overcompensate. You have to check a lot of boxes. He does that. Everything that he's done, his track and field resume, 10-4 in the 100-meter, I believe he was state champ on the relay team, 200-meter, 400-meter. Seeing this guy in Dallas work out over the offseason, alpha mentality. I talked yesterday, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Jamar Chase and a little bit of Malik Neighbors, kind of like the best of both games. And I think people can take that and run with that, and I understand that. But like him at the catch point, his balance, his body control, his ability to just win 50-50 balls, and then just his energy with the ball in his hands. His run after catch ability is super, super unique, So we're very aware of the fact that the number one receiver in the country is under 6 foot. We've seen examples of these guys in the past, whether it's recent in college like Zachariah Branch, or whether it's a guy like Jalen Waddle, right? Or a guy like Malik Neighbors going in the top 10 before a guy like Rome Odunze. So we feel super, super, super comfortable with him. And I mean, the day he steps on campus, man, he's going to be a dude. There's no like, hey, he's going to need a year or anything like that. I mean, he's going to be ready to play. He's going to be an instant impact guy.
Let's kind of stick with not specifically Dakorien's recruitment, but the fact that you look at Oregon's top 5 recruits, that kind of the headliners right now, they're from Texas, they're from Florida, from Maryland, from Kansas. This is a national recruiting program. And for listeners, I think most are familiar. You actually worked up at Oregon about half a decade ago, doing, in recruiting. What is Oregon selling these national guys on it? And like, what's from your perspective, like what's the strategy for getting some of these players? Because it's obviously really impressive to not just be grabbing players from that part of the country, but 5-star recruits and top 100 guys.
A lot has changed, I mean, I can't believe you said half a decade ago. That made me want to laugh a little bit, made me want to cry as well. But, a lot's changed from the NIL standpoint, from who's running the operation in terms of Dan Lanning. The landscape of college football has changed. Oregon's in the Big Ten now. So you're talking about one of the top 2 super conferences in all of college football. I think they're able to sell that. And I think they're at the point right now where they are the superpower on the West Coast. It's not USC anymore. They've done that. They've established that in the last 2 years, so they have, superseded USC and Lincoln Riley, and you got one program kind of trending up, and you got the other one trending water right now, trying to figure out kind of what's next and how to get back to where they're expected to be. So Dan Lanning, I think, has done all the right things. You look at the people that have come before him, and Mario Cristobal leaving Oregon to go to Miami. Before that, who was it? Helfrich, and then Chip. But continuity, I think, is big. When you have a guy like Dan Lanning that is, going to be one of the first phone calls to follow up Nick Saban after 17 years for one of the most premier jobs in all of college football. And he says, I'm committed to this place after Oregon's had their fair share of coaches leave for what they believe is greener pastures. I think that says everything. And I think recruits and their families have fed off of that. They understand that. And he has a physical brand of football that he wants to play. He wants to build it from the point of attack. And you want to know everything about Dan Lanning, go watch that pregame speech against Colorado. I mean, that's who he is. He's a substance dude. He's not out here trying to win the perception battle or doing anything like that. Nobody outside of Oregon's building is going to dictate how they do their business. So I think that attracts a lot of people, man. Like, straight up, if you want to know what it is, they're all in on winning and winning a championship, and not just doing it once, doing it twice, doing it 3 times. He's all in on being a sustainable superpower in college football. And I think that's pretty palpable to anybody who kind of understands it. And I think that the kids are picking up on that. And then on top of that, like, let's call a spade, man. Like, they're paying these kids, they're paying them well. Phil Knight's behind it. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a game that's being played, so they're fully aligned there, and that's why they're on top of the game.
In your years covering college football, either working in it or working for 247 Sports, is there a coach that you've seen that's a current coach, former coach, that's had the same kind of like 3-year run, 2 seasons, 3 off-season run that Dan has had, where he's kind of taken this program and taken it to the next level, and then now to a near, I'll ask you later about a blue blood, but like a near blue blood level kind of program in the first 3 years that he's been there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm trying to think if there's one specifically that comes to mind. None recently. I mean, quite honestly, not to say that it hasn't been done before. I know I'm probably missing one or two that have happened. Some of them have been longer builds, understandably so. I mean, Oregon's one of those programs that I feel like has been primed to be in this position for quite some time. It was
Mhm.
just going to take the right personality that understood that Oregon could be this program, could be a sustainable power, understand the resources and the backing and everything that Oregon has to offer on a national scale. And it's one of the biggest brands in college football. What we're seeing with Dan Lanning, and we've seen with people before him, with Mario Cristobal and Chip Kelly, and the list kind of goes on and on. We've seen people show flashes of that, show what Oregon can be. It's the more year over year, and I think Dan Lanning has Oregon in the mix to be. You're talking about a 12-team playoff now, a team
Mhm.
year in and year out that's going to be a contender in the Big Ten, and a team that's going to be, not only fighting for a playoff spot, but a team that I expect to compete for a national championship from this point forward.
What's the ceiling here? I ask this because I think a couple of years ago, and probably well before that, it was like, man, if Oregon could be a top 10 recruiting class program, that would be awesome. If Oregon could be maybe a top 5, does it feel like Oregon could, in the next several years, land like the number 1 class? Like, is that attainable in Eugene? I think that's something that I'm coming to terms with, that doesn't feel incredibly unlikely anymore.
No, that's real, man. I mean, like Josh Pate said it on his show. Like these guys are very real. They got the right people. It's not just like, hey, I'm under a microscope. I'm a new coach. We gotta, you know, all in on this year. We're gonna have this flash in the pan type of class. Like, I continue to say it. Like, this is his DNA. This is what he's about. And I think the more that people start to not come to terms with it, but the more that people really start to see the vision of it, Oregon, and what they are, and what he's trying to build there, and what you know, uh, I think will quickly become one of the most consistent programs at the top of college football. It's just not like a number 1 class, but I think expectations are going to change drastically. And like, yeah, if to go back on your other question about like who have you seen do this in like 3 years? How about Kirby? Taking over for Mark Richt. Like Georgia was a good program, right? But
Mhm.
everybody knew, all right, if Georgia gets it together, if they hone in on in-state talent, right? If they get their resources pointed in one direction, if they have this guy that's just got this unbelievable focus, energy when it comes to talent acquisition, player development, guy that really has a good understanding for, all right, he's going to, like we've seen this with Dan already. It's going to continue to happen, but like he's going to lose coaches because they're going to be successful. But
Yeah.
who do you replace him with, right? And I think looking at losing Locke to Ohio State, but replacing them with Rashad Samples, like those are all the little things that kind of add up to at the end of the day that keep you ahead of the chains. And it's easy to say, yeah, this guy worked under Kirby Smart, but they have a very similar disposition about how they see the game, how they attack things off the field as well. So, yeah, in terms of ceiling, like I'm not trying to be like cliche here and all this type of stuff. Like, there's only very few people that are like made of the right stuff to do this at a very high level, that are like the 1%ers of this game. That's your guy right now, in my opinion. So number 1 class, a national championship, competing for all those. Like, I'm not trying to blow smoke up anybody's ass. Like that's all on the table right now. Like that's it. That's where we are. Like I think you're heading for the golden age of Oregon football. Like that's what it's going to look like as long as Dan Lanning's there. I mean, and all of it's a perfect storm. The NIL, the Phil Knight, the way this guy recruits, it's all there. Like this is it. This is the time to go all in on Oregon right now.
Coop, since you're a national guy, I've got a national question for you, and you can kind of cater this towards Oregon. You could or just talk on the national landscape. Excuse me for my dog barking. I want to ask, like, how important is NIL? Is it like as important as some people tended to think it is, or is it just like it's something that's everywhere? It's a background thing that everybody knows about, but it's not the ultimate deciding factor for some guys.
It's important, man. I mean, like this is a business. Guys want to get paid, guys want to get taken care of. But like, here's the thing. Like, I brought this up with Clemson and David Sanders. The way that I view it is that you have to win the traditional recruitment. All right. So before NIL, what is that? Like, you have to uh, build the relationship, establish a relationship, get these guys to campus. Um, continue to say all the right things, do the right things, show them their path, show them their vision, show them what it's going to look like in terms of player development. What's your timeline here in terms of getting on the field? How can we get you to the league? How can we take care of you off the field as well once you graduate this program? That still has to happen, right? In a lot of ways, like that was Dakorien Moore. Like that happened with Dakorien Moore. Dakorien Moore is committed to LSU. These guys just put Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas in the first round of the NFL draft. Cortez Hankton, had Lad McConkey at Georgia. He's got a pretty good resume. One of the best, wide receiver developers in the country. LSU won the traditional recruitment. When push comes to shove, and I bring this up with David Sanders as well, Clemson was in the lead with David Sanders. They did everything right, right? Then all of a sudden, Nebraska gets involved, and Ohio State's getting involved, and Tennessee's getting involved. All right, well, if everything's the same and I can get developed at any one of these places, that maybe the difference between Junior Adams and Cortez Hankton is not so much that I'm going to go one place over the other, but the money's exponentially different. Like that's the thing, man. Like to me, the traditional recruitment and the work in the traditional recruitment, it gets you to it's the buy-in, right? It gets you a spot at the table. What happens at the table after that? Who's got the most chips, right? So if I can get developed and I can get paid, then I'm going to go to that spot that gives me that opportunity. And I bring it up as like Oregon, like yeah, Oregon would be Oregon would be a beast and very difficult to deal with if NIL didn't exist.
Mhm.
Throw it in now, it just makes them even more difficult to really kind of contend with. And they're smart, they know where they can get in, but getting Dakorien Moore out of Texas, from Texas and LSU, I mean, if that doesn't tell you that these guys are all in, then I don't know what does, and they've I mean, they're showing their teeth, man. Like this isn't just like a one-off type of thing. They're going coast to coast, guys like Dallas Wilson, Dorian Brew, Brandon Finney. Like these dudes are legit. So Pickett, Williams, like, you know, um, yeah, they're serious, and the guys in the top 250, guys outside of the top 250 that are good players and that are big bodies and that can offer value and that are hard to find, they're getting paid, So
Yeah.
yes, it's a lot of it, but these guys are not like making irresponsible business decisions. Oregon's saying, "Hey, you can come here, you can get developed, you can play on the biggest stage of college football. We're in the Big Ten now. You're going to be on TV. You're going to, like we played Michigan and Ohio State in the first 6 weeks of the season. Um, yeah, it's a pretty easy sell.
Oh, Eric, am I going again? Sorry, just great podcasting from us. I'll tell you what.
Go ahead.
I'll go one more time. Okay. So, Cooper, I mentioned this earlier, but the idea of Oregon like being a blue blood. I'm personally, I don't know if they're there or not, but what is, what do you think of it first off, and then just kind of what are the next steps that they can take to get to that blue blood level of play at college football?
Well, we got to establish the definition of blue blood first, right? I don't
Sure.
even know. It changes based on, the year and all that type of stuff. To me, it's like, all right, can you do it consistently over time? Um,
Mhm.
and then can you take home the hardware like when it matters? So I think Oregon's got a wonderful opportunity in the Big Ten. We can talk all this game and we can talk about Dan Lanning being maniacal, but like man, like looking at the schedule this year, you got obviously Jonathan Smith taking over for Mel Tucker, but Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin with the tough Luke Fickell team. You got Washington there and Jed Fish, certainly a lot of turnover, but those are 3 games on your schedule that those are eye openers, right? Those are like barometer, big barometer test for this program. So you're going to find out. And I think the world and the rest of the country is going to find out what Oregon's about and where they are. I think people keep thinking, oh, they're close, they're close, they're close. I think they're here. And I expect this season to kind of be the eye opener for everybody. So I think it's year over year consistency. I think it's almost, as a fan, you get bored by the success and you get shocked when it doesn't happen. And what I mean by that is, like, sometimes, Georgia will go out there and some 5-star linebacker will commit. And it just blows my mind that the feedback on a board or the feedback on social media is just limited. That's what people expect. That's what people expect with Ohio State. That's what people expect with Georgia. That's what people expected with Nick Saban in Alabama. That stuff is hard, man. It ain't easy, right? Like, people want to say, oh, that's Alabama, that's Georgia, that's, they're self-sustainable. It's not self-sustainable. The people in the building, those are the people that are the difference. So once they get to that level where this is just what you expect, and, they go out there and, they have all these guys committed at the top of their board, and it's, like the Dakorien Moore doesn't shock me. Oh, they got Jonah Williams. That doesn't shock me. DJ Pickett, that doesn't shock me. Oh, they flipped this dude that was committed to X school for, the last year before signing. That doesn't shock. Like, once they get to that level where people really kind of understand, like, this is just kind of what they do. That's what I would consider. I'd stay away from the blue blood stuff because people, will twist it and all that type of stuff. But I think, in terms of expectations on the recruiting trail and on the field, I think, in the next 2 years, I think Oregon's going to have a different type of respect than what they've had previously.
All right, Coop, we'll get you out of here with just a couple questions on the rankings. We've got fans who had some questions about a couple of risers, a couple of fallers for the Ducks. Let's start with the guy who had the biggest movement upwards, and that was Brandon Finney, a cornerback out of Maryland. I watched his tape and thought he was like kind of the prototype corner for modern football at 6'3", has the track background. What did you see with him, and kind of what led, at least from your perspective, to him rising up, I think 125 spots based upon what I saw?
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, this is me. So, like, don't bring in Andrew and the rest of our scouting team on this, but this is my opinion. Like, we got him at 95. He could have gone a lot higher. Like, in my opinion, 6'1", 3/4, 180 pounds. He's got a 6'5" wingspan. He ran 10.85. He's got everything you want, man. Ran 4.59. So the metrics and all that, it's all there, but a long, fluid kid with really good ball skills that's still grown into his body. These are the dudes that you want to bet on. So listen, I love what they're doing in the secondary. I think outside of Ohio State, Oregon's probably 1A, 1B with those dudes. Brandon Finney's the type of guy from a physical clay standpoint. We got him inside the top 100, but quite honestly, I mean, if he continues the trajectory from what he did as a junior, carries that as a senior, I think sky's the limit for this kid. I mean, I think he can kind of put a rocket on his back and we'll see what happens. But physical clay is there. The production's there as well. So I love him. He was kind of a no-brainer in my opinion. And I got to give a shout out to Hudson Standish, young Hudson on our scouting group. He's got the area of Maryland, but did a phenomenal job and came into our scouting meeting. And, a lot of these guys, like, I have my own area, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, outside of just national. I mean, it's hard, man, to like scout 247 players and another 150 players outside of that might be in it. But he came and said, hey, like, this is a dude. So, excuse me. But, so anyway, I got eyes on him a few days ago and was just kind of, wow, it's kind of floored with him. So regardless of where we have him ranked, like, if I'm an Oregon fan, I'm stoked about this kid. Super, super excited.
And let's talk about the player that you guys dropped the most here, and that was Akili Smith Jr., the quarterback from San Diego. He fell 133 spots, which is, I think, pretty close to the biggest drop of anybody in the rankings. And I know, listening to you and Andrew yesterday on the release show, you talked about the biggest data point was the Elite 11 camp, and maybe he didn't have a great camp. Kind of what I don't know. Were you out there for it? Kind of what did you see? Like, what went into these kind of conversations? I'm curious because this is a guy Oregon fans obviously are interested in, given the pedigree with his dad and all that.
Yeah, quarterback's an interesting position when you're evaluating it. You're kind of separating it out from the rest of the field, and this one's interesting. And we went on our podcast and we kind of talked about it before the show because we knew what was coming. We knew we were going to drop George McIntyre. We knew we were going to drop Julian Lewis. And the biggest thing is that we want to give these guys every opportunity to prove the notion of where we have these guys potentially moving, like, all right, Elite 11 before their senior season, when we stack these guys one more time before their last year, we want to have these guys, we want to make sure we're buttoned up, right? So I don't want to drop a kid however many spots, then he goes to Elite 11, I got to change my mind, and then we got to bump him back up in the rankings or vice versa. And with Akili, Akili was one of those guys that we had discussed that we had a big range on. So what I mean by that is, some of our teams saw him kind of in that day 2 conversation. Others saw him in that day 3. I was kind of in the latter. I had a lot of question marks just about the physical arm talent, what he brought to the table. Obviously, you love the frame, 6'5", 225 pounds. I think the best thing Akili's got going for him is the game tape. The good thing for us is you get to see Akili Smith, not only Akili Smith, but all these other quarterbacks, Julian Lewis, Hassan Longstreet, Keelan Russell, Tavian St. Clair. You get to see 20 of the best arms in the country. Now, whether those are the best 20 arms, people will debate that, but Elite 11 does a phenomenal job in terms of identifying this talent, getting these guys to regionals, inviting them. And I thought Akili really struggled, to be completely honest with you, just in terms of the physical toolkit, what he has to offer. He's got a long way to go. I think a lot of these guys at the next level, you'll see their timeline look sometime in the first 2 years. I think Akili's got at least 2 to 3 years of development. I think he's a longer burn. He's not as far ahead as you think he would be, being the son of Akili Smith. That's not a shot at him. But he does some really, really positive things. And look, I think the average number of quarterbacks that gets drafted in the NFL draft is 12 and a half. So we have 19 4-stars right now. So we're trying to be a little bit more honest and a little bit conservative with those numbers. And, Akili's still in the top 247. It's a guy that we still like. So we're looking forward to his senior season. But, quite honestly, we were very convicted on that. Like, if you wanted me to be blunt about this, like I've been blunt about everything else, 20 quarterbacks at that event, depending on who you ask, Akili's probably 17 through 20 based on how he did on those 3 days, right? And that, guess what? The good thing for Akili and the good thing for us, the Elite 11 is not everything, but after seeing these guys after 2 years, seeing them live and then seeing them on the field, this was very clear to us. This is kind of where he fit in with the rest of the pack.
Awesome stuff, Cooper. I know we kept you a little bit longer than we said beforehand, but you had so many insights that we felt like, hey, we had to keep kind of peppering you with questions. So appreciate the time, man. Awesome having you, and we'll have to have you on here maybe sooner than next July, next time.
Yeah, of course, man. And listen, to all the Oregon fans out there, man, like you're living in it, dude. Ride the wave. Like I said, you got 16 commit. 13 of these guys are in the top 240. You got a really good team. You got a really good coach. You got a really good support staff. Like this is it, so enjoy it, man. I mean, it's a talented team. It's a talented infusion of players coming in as well. So lot to be excited about.
Appreciate your time, Cooper. And for
Thank you,
Jared
Cooper.
Mack, this has been Eric Scopel on the Outs and Audibles podcast. Talk to you later, folks.